Howdy, everybody. Shasta College, Humanities 4, Film Studies, first day of March, 2021. Hope you all had an interesting weekend. The weather's pretty nice, very spring-like. I noticed things are starting to bloom out there. I got finished with your essays, number 2, that is, number 1 and 2. Please, I'm not going to keep saying it, but everybody needs to get the textbook writing about films. This little guy is going to help save your day. I'm going to stop making comments where please read the book. You have to read the book. And I would just go through the book. It's not very big. But this thing breaks down acting, editing, sound, cinematography. It breaks down the meaning of content. In your essays, when you say something's great or good or poor, and then you move on, I need you to explain what that means exactly. What is the explicit or the implicit meaning of what you're trying to get at? That lets me know you're analyzing and critically thinking about what you're trying to get at. So when you say something like, the acting is really good, or it's really awesome, it's really great. Well, okay, that's great. I don't want the adjectives. I don't care. I want to know what makes it so good or great. Now, I know it's just going to be coming down to your opinion, but you're going to get better. The more movies you watch, the more analysis you do, your analysis is going to become more astute. So even if you don't really know movies, you don't have to know them very well, but you see things, you can hear things. Also, it's important to know what's going on in the culture at the time these movies were made. We've talked about that. I try to give cultural explanations, what's going on in the culture. So far, we've done, the silent era and what was going on in that culture before World War I. Then we got into the Roaring 20s, where you did your first film, which was Prohibition time, but also women were getting the right to vote. They're cutting their hair. They're smoking cigarettes. They're looking for their place in the world. Just wasn't completely a male-dominated world. And then we went on to your second film, which was the Depression. What's going on in those films? How did those films relate to the Depression? I know that Public Enemy had flashbacks to way before the Depression, but it came up to the Depression. What makes it relevant? Why were gangster films so popular? Because booze was illegal for many, many years. And the culture was interested in looking at the crime that developed around that. So it's important to look at these films and look at the culture, the humanities. This is a humanities class that goes with it. You just did your third essay, Citizen Kane, which was the 1940s, the early 40s. We're coming out of the Depression. We're getting into World War II. We're not there yet, but we're close. We're on the verge. Europe is at war. Germany is bombing England 2 years before Citizen Kane was made. We're ramping up for war with Japan. We're not there yet, but very close. And so that is all going on around the making of these films. The culture reflects the films, and the films reflect the culture. Now I'm going to ask you, when we do our midterm, you'll probably have some questions pertaining to the culture and the films representative of that culture of that time. Just like the films are representing the times we're living in right now. That's why we have so many superhero movies, folks. You think it's just like, oh, all of a sudden we want to have superhero movies? No, we're living in very volatile times. We're living in changing times. It's nothing. We've got several little wars going on in the world. Other countries are very hostile towards us. We're hostile towards them. What's going on in our culture in the United States? We have the protests. We have the invasion of the Capitol during the election. We've got this um, social disregard for um, African American community, maybe poverty. Like right now, people getting the vaccine. Some wealthy people are getting it. Some poor people aren't getting it. That's what's going on in the culture. It's huge. And so you've got to look at the culture around you, and the movies reflect that. I mean, this week I saw some new movies on Netflix, and they're all very culturally aware of what's going on in our environment right now. I mean, I just saw Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Now that play it was a play um, written by a black author who's dead now, and talking about a black jazz singer in the 1920s and how she's trying to find her place in the world, in a white world, in a Jim Crow world. So why make that film now? Why not? Because there's a lot of cultural unrest in the African American community, and so the film now it's like a good time to make the film. Yeah, they could have made it earlier. It was a successful play when it came out in the 80s as a play, a stage play. And so culturally, you have films about sexual identity, and that's more in the forefront than it's ever been in my entire life. You no longer need to be in any closet, but there's going to be a price to pay for your freedom of your identity. Perhaps you know what I'm talking about. Hopefully you do, and you're not just being naive or ignorant, because sometimes there's violence involved in it. I mean, every day some trans person is assaulted in this country. Well, movies are starting to reflect that. It's not safe to be different. Never has been, actually. I mean, even in Public Enemy, he wasn't different, and you knew he was going to end up bad. He had to. He had to end up bad. I mean, look, but his brother was going to live. Look at the culture that James Cagney character was raised in. Why did he turn out that way, but his brother didn't? Is it a simple toss of the coin, good seed, bad seed, or does one brother just have more opportunities, more insights, more love, more understanding from people? That's what I'm looking for you to analyze in those films. I know you're still getting used to silent films. We don't have to watch any more of those, so you're off the hook on that. You're getting used to sound films, early sound films. This is a great example of an early sound film. But some of you also wrote about It Happened One Night, which is a pretty sophisticated film. 1934, sound had been around quite a while. They knew what they were doing with sound and with the black and white photography. And then it becomes, I keep saying when I'm giving you comments, try to judge these. Well, try not to judge the films, analyze the films instead of looking at it through current eyes, current cinema, your current times in your life, and try to act like if you can, behave like you're walked into a movie theater in 1931 to watch Public Enemy, or 1934 to watch It Happen One Night, and it was state of the art cinema. You don't know any different. Nobody does. And so you can't say, well, it's clunky or it's slow, or it's awkward compared to now. Yes, it is, but it wasn't for them. And that's the key to watching these old movies, just like reading Shakespeare or reading Moby Dick. Yes, the language is different, but the characters were no different than they were 500 years ago when Shakespeare was writing Hamlet. We're still going through that. We don't change. Our language changes. The surroundings of technology changes, but humans don't change. We're still going through the same loves, loss, unrequited love, death, violence that we've always gone through. These movies reflect that, and that's what keeps them human, because that's what makes us who we are, the humanities. Um, and then he put it into the historical, cultural time, and so of when that movie was made. This week, I'm going to assign a discussion this week and a paper at the beginning of next week, so don't worry about another paper yet. But it's going to be probably in movies from the 1950s, or it will be. I just have to decide which ones yet. And that's what I want to talk about today. Please have this book. In my comments, I keep talking about looking at the book. Have you read the book? Please read the book. It will help you. You can thumb to any page in here, and it'll tell you how to develop a paragraph for your essay and your what I'm looking for. Turning your ideas into a thesis. And some of you have some very good ideas, but you don't know how to corral them yet. And if you don't know what a thesis is, you need to look that stuff up. That's from your English class. And it's essentially the theme of your paper. Okay? Simply put. Also, I'm always saying in my comments, please, what is the theme here? And generalizing by saying, oh, the theme is booze or it's love. Well, those are really, that's a circumstance. Themes are so much more. For example, what would be some themes that happened one night for those of you who did that essay? It would be class struggle, rich. She comes from a rich family who has everything. She's like, the Paris Hilton of her day. She's a spoiled brat. Her dad's trying to rope her into marrying a guy she shouldn't marry, because she's not marrying for love. She's marrying for status. She breaks free of that. And then she runs into the newspaper guy who's a working guy, working stiff, Clark Gable, and he hates rich people. So he's got issues with rich people. He doesn't like them, the way they operate. And she doesn't dislike poor people. She doesn't understand it. She doesn't know that world. She doesn't know how to live. She doesn't know how to pay her own bills. She's a spoiled princess. So that's a theme. Misguided love, marrying for money. The Depression was a real background to that movie. They're traveling through depressing world. They're riding on the bus. She's not used to that. They're staying in these. That's what hotels used to look like, folks. They stay more like communes where you're mixing it up with people, not like hotels are now, where you all have your own bathroom, your own shower, and all that. We're all spoiled right now. But that's how the world was in the 1930s. But there's also a wonderful humanity about how people are treated in that movie. Like people on the bus, they're all singing songs together to get through the troubles, their hard times. And it makes them feel like they're in it together. And in Public Enemy, same thing. Here's this kid born on supposedly the wrong side of the tracks. And in the beginning, it's kind of cute how he's, leads to a life of crime, but his brother, not his brother though. And you see the trajectory of his poverty and the fact that he wants money and he wants it, he'll get it any way he can, whereas the brother wants to earn it the hard way. And the mother loves them equally. Mother's always going to love their child. Hitler's mother loved him. Charles Manson's mother probably loved him. And so the many themes of that movie, you can't escape your social surroundings, for one. Yes, you can make money, but he's still, at the end of the day, he's still a punk. But in a way, he dies kind of a noble death. But he's going to die. Back in the code, when the code came out, if you're a bad person, you have to be punished. You don't get away with it. So he's not going to get away with it. And it's going to be heartbreaking when the mother finds out. She's up there changing. She's looking forward for him to coming home from the hospital. She doesn't know he's been kidnapped and murdered. She's going to find out. And their life is going to go on. And the loss is going to go on. And hopefully something's learned at the end of the day. We are our actions. We become our actions. And his actions were not good. He murdered a guy, a mentor. He murders a horse. He's not a good guy, although he's charming. So many themes in Citizen Kane, it's hard to go through all of them. But here's a child ripped from his parents when he needed to be with his parents. Here's a child who was happy playing in the snow of Colorado on a sled. And here is a kid who's, because of circumstances, getting rich beyond most of our wildest dreams. He's thrown into a world he hates. And he becomes a spoiled kid. He gets kicked out of colleges because he goes from one fancy college to another. He overspends his money, and the only time he becomes human is when he buys that newspaper. But when he bought the newspaper, he's going to make it into a big success by turning it into tabloid journalism and breaking all the journalistic rules of telling the truth. He's not going to tell the truth. It's like he says in the movie, I will tell them what's news. Really? Instead of reporting on the news, he's going to tell people what the news is. So that's his tragic flaw. And also, he can't fly in love. He loses love from his mother and maybe his abusive father. And I hope he maybe caught that. He's raised by a banker in boarding schools, the best of everything, traveling through Europe. But he has no passion for any of it. So he meets his wife, right? And it looks like it's kind of a cute thing, but it starts disintegrating pretty soon, pretty quick. They're on opposite sides of the political spectrum. They have a child. He doesn't really have too much to do with that child. Then he has an affair with the woman he meets on the street, the singer. And then the wife and the child are killed. And we never see how it affects him. Obviously it does. And then he tortures that poor untalented singer to try to turn into a major star. Why do you think he did that? That's when I want you guys to look at stuff like that. Why? And look how the story was told through flashbacks, through the voices of people he worked with? Did they respect him? Did they like him? I think they did. But was he close to any of them? Not really. He had no friends. He bought friends. He put on huge, lavish parties. But you can't buy friends. At the end of the day, he's alone. He dies alone in his bed, saying the one word rosebud, meaning the sled that he grew up with, the one meaningful thing where he had love in his life, he had a secure life, a poor life. And so he clings on to that snow globe because it reminds him of his childhood, of innocence, got ripped from him. Just a complicated, very complicated story. Hopefully you guys went deep on it. Hope you do. I look forward to reading them. I haven't started reading them yet. I think the last ones are due today, so I'll start reading them tomorrow. It takes me about a week to grade everything. On that happy note, this week I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes talking about another revolution in film. And it changed everything. Most of these films they talk about are game changers. What's changing now? What's going on in the culture? And that's when we're watching film noir films, Italian neorealism. We're not looking at the fantasy and fairy tale of old style Hollywood films. And so other things have to change too. Writing changes, directing changes, and performers change. And in the 1930s, there was an acting group, and they had a bunch of people who were following the Stanislavski method. He's a Russian. If you guys know anything about studying for acting, he essentially created a style of acting which later was labeled the method. And it's usually based on, instead of faking your emotions, you don't fake it. You dredge up your real emotions to make you feel for real and sense memory. And so a couple people in the 1940s started these acting schools. One of them was the Actors Theater. Lee Strasberg started it, and it changed the face of acting, and it still is changing the face of acting. There were other teachers. Bella Adler was one of his partners, and she had her own studio in New York. But who studied? What were the young actors in the 1940s and 50s who were studying with these people? Well, they turned into the biggest movie stars of the next 30, 40 years. And they changed the course of performing in front of a camera. And right now I'm going to mostly talk about three actors, and they're all male, I'm afraid. There are women involved. Marilyn Monroe studied at the Actors Theater, folks. Either Saint Marie. I'll talk about them later. But the three men, because it's a male-dominated industry film, it is. Marlon Brando, maybe you've heard of him. Maybe you know who I'm talking about. James Dean, hopefully you've heard of him. And the one you probably not that familiar with, Montgomery Clift, is the third one, the trifecta. These guys changed the course and the face of performing in front of the camera. They all studied the method acting, most of them, and they used that what's a good way to put this? I want to say this in a different way. I'm tired of saying it the same way. They used the method as a tool to get at the truth of their characters. Now you're saying, well, hold on. It's all a lie. Movies are a lie. They're all fake, right? Well, but it's like the guy said, you could tell the truth through fiction better than nonfiction. So you might be working on a script that is a made up story, but it doesn't mean it's not the truth. And so Lee Strasberg started this famous school in New York City, and people like Marlon Brando and so many actors, hundreds and hundreds of television actors that weren't known or famous, Ben Gazzara, so many of them studied under him and his other teachers. And that, then they got jobs in movies and television, and that changed everything. People like Dennis Hopper, if you know who that is, uh, was all at the actor's studio, and it wasn't easy to get in there. So I'm going to sign on. Make sure you look in Canvas, and there'll be a you'll see to look at modules. There'll be a little Lee Strasberg documentary. Now, please watch it and look at it, but it's in German. It's a German. I can't find an American documentary that's short. This thing's just I don't know how long it is. 15 minutes. It's for German TV. They do, but they interview a bunch of Americans, so that's obviously in English, and the narration is in German, but you can figure out what's being said. It's very clear. Uh, German and English is not that far off. I think the root language, the roots of it all, comes from the same area, so you'll be able to figure it out, and you'll see what it was like to be in one of those classes. Um, And these guys, Marlon Brando came on the stage, was a stage actor. Most all of them were. That's how you did it in those days. You started on the New York stage usually, and he had been in a couple of plays off Broadway and on Broadway, and one of them was called Truckline Cafe, and that's when Elia Kazan, the director I talked about last week, that was one of the directors who gave names to the House on Un-American Activities. He saw that. He cast Brando in A Streetcar Named Desire, a Tennessee Williams play that took Broadway by storm. If you know the play at all, it's a great movie, by the way. Made about 3 years later after the play came out, 48 or so, 1948. It's about a couple living in the French Quarter in New Orleans, and Stanley and Stella, and he works a manly job. He plays hard, parties hard. He's a man's man, and women love him. And he's a sexual animal, has a good relationship with his pregnant wife, and then her sister comes to stay with them, and she's prim and proper, educated, and she's running from something. Obviously, what she's running from is she's a school teacher, and she had possibly an affair with a student, and so she's kind of on. She's in a fragile position. She's having in the middle of what I would call an emotional breakdown. She comes to stay with her sister in New Orleans. Well, guess what? Her and Stanley go after it, each other. And at first, you're thinking they hate each other. Quite the contrary. He he sees in her something that he doesn't see in his wife, and she sees his brute magnetism. And this movie made this, I should say, the play made Marlon Brando a very sought after actor. He did his first movie called The Men about paralyzed veterans who came out of World War II without the use of their legs. And then he made this movie, Streetcar Named Desire, and it changed everything. Everybody in 1951 who saw this movie, who were of impressionable age and wanted to be actors in Hollywood, they glommed onto that movie like it was the holy truth. That's what they saw. That's what they wanted to do. And there were not hundreds, but thousands, male and female actors, because Kim, not Kim Stanley, but she was a great method actor too. Kim Stanley, Kim, why am I forgetting her name? Plays Stanley's wife. She studied with Lee Strasberg. Um, And so it's almost like the movie's like it's a method acting movie. Absolutely, it is. Changed everything. Later on, Brando made Viva Zapata with Elia Kazan. Later on, he made On the Waterfront, which we talked about. Brando won the Academy Award for On the Waterfront and others later. And so the Method treated him very well. He's kind of like the poster boy for the Method. James Dean is a little bit underneath that because James Dean only made 3 movies before he was tragically killed at 24 years old. 1955, by the way. So he'd be 85 or something now. Well, Brando is dead. They're all dead, folks. Brando would be 95. And James Dean was not the raging masculine, almost machismo actor that Brando was. He was sensitive to the point where men and women liked him. He didn't put off such a male persona that Brando did. And so, because there's been, and I've read all the books on James Dean, he did dabble in bisexuality, and so men loved him and women loved him. They adored him, and that shows in his performances. They're very sensitive, very male, but very sensitive at the same time. These guys aren't afraid of crying or fear of looking weak. Brando's the same way. They're flawed men. And up until now, the males in Hollywood were performed by Gary Cooper and Clark Gable and John Wayne, and they're very male actors. You'll never catch them crying or being a baby. Humphrey Bogart, you never catch him crying. And those are great actors. I love Humphrey Bogart. It's a different kind of thing, though. You're never going to see them really having a softer side or breaking down and having a moment. Any emotion that happens in their lives, they take a shot of whiskey and smoke a cigarette and they move on. Not in these movies. Not so easy. And so people related to it because that's what we all go through. We all just can't take a shot of whiskey and smoke a cigarette and get over death and heartache and love, loss. That's fake. That's fairy tale. And so these actors are portraying these real flawed characters who had all sorts of complexities that we've never seen before. And so writers are they're writing complex scripts, directors are directing these complex characters, and they have these actors performing this. I will sign you a couple of documentaries to look at and Canvas, please do, on each of these actors. The other one would be Montgomery Clift, who was a stage actor, very sensitive prodigal. He was a genius stage actor, very, very sensitive. He's if Brando's at the top of the heap, dominant wise, the alpha male, James Dean is in the middle. Montgomery Clift is very much underneath. He's very, very sensitive and flawed. He's not macho at all. And in reality, Montgomery Clift was a closeted homosexual. And because it was the days in the 1950s, you didn't come out of the closet without getting destroyed. And in some states, it's against the law, folks. And so he hid his pain in alcoholism. And that's what eventually killed him at a very young age. He drank and drugged himself to death. In the meantime, he made a macho movie with John Wayne, one of the great westerns ever made, called Red River. In fact, when he got cast as his character, John Wayne said, "I don't know, this guy's too wimpy for me." And they're supposed to have a fist fight in it. And John Wayne's a big guy like me, 6'4", and he's a big, brawny, macho guy. I'm 6'4", but I'm not brawny. I'm macho. And so he went to the director, Howard Hawks, and he goes, I can't play the fighting scene with him. He's only 5'8". He's a little guy. It'll look like, how can the big John Wayne hero beat up on this little guy? And Howard Hawks goes, well, believe me, we're going to film it in such a way that he cuts you down in size. And if you watch this fight, maybe I'll show you, make you guys watch the previews. Montgomery Clift does great in the fight. And he's a deadly shot with a gun. And so he's not a big strapping macho kind of bully guy. He's a quiet, withdrawn, sensitive, but deadly and capable man. And that was kind of the rest of the kind of roles he usually played in the 50s. Very successful career, but he was a very difficult guy because of his alcoholism. And he had a great relationship with the actress Elizabeth Taylor. In fact, he was at a party at her house, and he got in his car drunk. This is in Hollywood, folks. About 1956 or so, he got in a car wreck going down the hill and completely destroyed his face. He had a beautiful face. He was, very delicate and handsome. And he had surgery after surgery to reconstruct his face, and he was never the same after that. He didn't look the same. He was playing more flawed characters because he was feeding his lack of love in his life and the fact that his face was rearranged with as much drugs and alcohol as the pain, until the pain subsided. And of course, it's not going to subside, folks. It's just going to get worse. So he's a tragic story. And towards the end of his life, he was incapable of working. He couldn't memorize dialogue. He was only in his 40s, folks. And people don't want to work with him anymore. One of his last great movies is Clark Gable's last movie, and Marilyn Monroe's movie written by Arthur Miller, directed by Don Huston, called Misfits. And it's wonderful. They're wonderful in it. Clark Gable died. Marilyn Monroe would go off to commit suicide a couple, 2-3 years later. Montgomery Clift didn't die soon thereafter, but he died within 5 years of alcoholism and the inability to work anymore. So there's some tragedy in that movie. So when you're watching it, you can't help but see that, how sensitive these performers were. And this all revolves around this method acting that Lee Strasberg essentially invented, this sense memory. If you're feeling sorrow, you better think of something that makes you really feel sad, or you're being a fake. And so you think of things that makes you feel sad, a death of a loved one or a pet or something. And people use these things. They abused it. Directors abused it. I mean, the classic story is when, I don't know, it was Lassie, the movie, or something like that. Could have been International Velvet, Liz Taylor. They weren't getting the performance out of her they needed. So the director whispered in her ear, your parents were just killed in a car wreck. Well, he lied. She started crying. And they go, get the camera on her right now. That's child abuse, folks. She believed him. But he got the crying he needed out of it. So directors could be to change the history of acting. I'll post some documentaries. I'm going to post a discussion. Look at the documentaries over the next week. Also, on this discussion, which I'll post tonight or tomorrow, I want you to pick out a favorite movie of yours. I don't care what it is. It'll be new. It'll be in color, folks, so you'll be happy. It'll have lots of sound effects, superheroes, maybe it's animation, whatever. I don't care what it is. And I want you to give like a paragraph of analysis on it. How would you analyze your favorite film? And I don't mean saying, oh, it's got cool sound effects or it's got cool special effects or the CGI is wonderful. No. Why? Why is it wonderful? Describe what makes it wonderful. What makes it cool? I know you're not going to write about a movie you hate. I should do that instead. I should make you guys. Well, you already done that for the last two movies. I kid. You don't hate them. You just don't know them. So in the discussion, pick your movie you like. I don't care what it is, and tell me, three things about it, and why does it work? What worked? Why does this movie have hold on you? What magic does it work on you? And so when you're thinking about that, think about these essays you're doing now. Yes, you don't know these movies we're watching for the most part. I don't think most of you have ever seen these things. Um, and try to look at it like that, like it's you're seeing your favorite movie for the first time and how it affects you. But be critical about it. Don't just say, "Oh, I like it because it makes me feel good." No, that's not good enough. Why does it make you feel good? Why? I'm going to always keep asking you why. Oh, the direction's great. Okay, that's great. Fine. Why? Explain that. And you can do it in 2, 3 sentences. The direction's great because the actors are convincing, and the way the camera is positioned, filming the actors to convey this scene very convincingly, is makes the director sensitive to the human condition. You've just explained what makes that director great doing that scene, but you've got to explain it. That's where the critical analysis keeps coming in. That's what I can keep hammering home on these essays. On that, I'm going to cut it down. I've talked too long. Hope you guys are staying safe out there. Hope you're enjoying some part of your life. It's all not just torture. And we'll meet again on Wednesday where the story film continues. Thank you.